Well, that was a close game, at least at halftime, as the Syracuse Orange do pull away from Pitt 77-61. Syracuse with the victory over the Pitt Panthers. This is your Pitt post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now. I'm Mike Asti, and I will be joined by our Pitt beat writer, George Michalowski of Pittsburgh Sports Now. And also, we will have a special guest to also talk about the Syracuse perspective. So from the other side, Alex Sims, an anchor and reporter of WSYR-TV, to cover and talk Syracuse. And yeah, Pitt had a chance, only a 1-point differential at halftime, a close game early, but Syracuse then pulling away. Pitt's kind of season of keeping it close for a while, but not enough, kind of continues as well as Pitt once again falls in a conference game. This one not as close as some others recently, but maybe it was for a while. George, to get us started here, what changed from the first half to the second half? Because Pitt was able to hit shots in that first half. They're hitting some outside perimeter shots in that first half. They kept that score close, obviously, a 1-point differential there at halftime. And then Pitt just couldn't hit a shot, it seemed, in that second half, and Syracuse able to do enough to pull away. Was it that simple, or what really occurred to kind of change the course of this game and have this end up being a pretty comfortable victory for Syracuse?
Right. So I think the number one thing that you're saying, a lot of things went into it, obviously, but I think Pitt did just get lazy. They kind of got complacent with how they'd played. In the beginning of the first half, they got down. Then they had some effort. They had some energy. Burton got hot. Odikale got hot. Guy was cleaning up the boards, getting some good second chance opportunities. So things looked really good for Pitt for a while, even towards the last few minutes of the first half. And then in those last few minutes, they got lazy. They had an 8-point lead at one point, but then they stopped making those crisp passes around the wings to find the guys like Burton and Odikale who were hot from three. They just stopped getting those open looks. They stopped moving without the ball, started to force passes. And once a few turnovers piled up, the shot selection kept getting uglier. They started kind of getting obsessed with this Syracuse zone that seems suffocating when you're missing shots. And this was all while Syracuse was kind of heating up. So yeah, it all just combined to go downhill very quickly. And it was a 27-5 run, from the end of the first half till about 10 minutes left in the second half. And you're not going to compete. You're not going to get anywhere close with that.
And I think we got to keep in mind here too, this isn't your older brother by a year Syracuse team. I mean, this is a struggling Syracuse team this year. Pitt had kept it close in games against Boston College, Notre Dame recently, even Louisville. That 1-point loss to Notre Dame still probably a backbreaker for a lot of Pitt fans. That's kind of one that Jeff Capel said he thought kind of got away from them. So George, what happened aside from the change of the first half and the second half, and then you saying they're getting lazy, and then Syracuse went on a run? And yeah, this is a Pitt team that I think many expected to struggle this year, and certainly they've improved themselves from where they were at the beginning of the season with the loss of Citadel, and the roster has changed, and obviously they've gone through some off-court drama as well. But how does a team get lazy after having so many close games in recent memory, including some close losses? Would you not think that would ignite a team only trailing by one, another conference foe that they finally can catch napping and is vulnerable and by record is really no better than them, and yet they got lazy? Is that not a pretty hefty criticism of Jeff Capel, or what kind of is going on here?
It's tough to say because all of these games, all of those close games that they played were so different from this one.
Right. It's fair.
A lot of those close games were kind of Pitt falls apart and can't get a bucket for the 3-minute period from 4 minutes left to 1 minute left. And then they need a miracle shot, which, Jamarius Burton hit in the St. John's game. Some of the other games they didn't hit. Yeah. So those games were kind of like down the wire. They kind of got, I don't know if they got lazy in those games, but I'm saying those games, they fell apart in a different time, in a different way. Tonight, it was more of just, they just lost control early on. They should have came out inspired. They kind of came out slow. It seemed like it took them a while to adjust to the zone. This group of Panthers is obviously a new group. They've played together, obviously, this year so far, a few ACC games under their belt.
Right.
But they haven't seen anything really like the 2-3 zone from Syracuse.
That's fair.
It's not like they're a veteran group of ACC players. So that
it usually does take a while to get used to this Syracuse team. I'm sure Alex can attest to that. I mean, it takes a while to get used to playing Syracuse. Usually the second time around, if not the third time around, is when you finally get a hang of it. And obviously in college basketball these days, it's rare to even face a team 3 times because usually if you're a good player, you might be bouncing, or it's with transfers, you don't have that much chemistry. And this is kind of a whole new Pitt roster. There's a lot of turnover from last year. Alan Saunders actually brought up that point on Twitter during the game, that with this much turnover facing this team, maybe that zone, maybe playing this team and their style is why you saw a blowout loss. That Pitt had not experienced a blowout loss in a while, even while losing, which some thought maybe this team was getting better here. Alex, I do want to flip it to you, or Alex Sims joining us, anchor and reporter of WSYR as well, WSYR-TV, as she can talk Syracuse. What kind of changed for Syracuse? How were they able to kind of pick it up? And were you at all surprised that Pitt, who I'm sure you've heard about from colleagues and friends and, just watching college basketball, this is a Pitt team that's gone through every kind of disarray that you could possibly imagine on and off the court, tons of turnover. We have a player dealing with a legal battle right now, and obviously the team has not won enough games on the floor. And yet Syracuse was in a dogfight in the first half, but then it flipped in the second half. How did this game unfold in comparison to kind of what you expected entering this game?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, coming into this game, both teams I felt like were very similar. I mean, in terms of records and the types of games they've had this season. I mean, both teams have gone down to the wire, have lost really close games. So I knew this was going to be a dogfight going in. And then Syracuse went on a 10-2 run at the end of the first half, which I think kind of lifted that momentum moving forward into the second half. Now, if you've watched Syracuse play the last 3 games before tonight, they've kind of just stopped playing defense altogether in the second half. So they've led by a lot for most games. For most losses, they've led by I don't even know how much, but they so it was really at this point we didn't really know what was going to happen in the second half because their defense has not been good, and Jim Boeheim has publicly said that it just hasn't been good enough this season. So we really didn't know what to expect. I think for starters, all 5 starters for Syracuse, played really well. It was a team effort. Almost all 5 of them, I think 4 out of the 5 scored in double figures tonight. The only one that didn't was Joe Girard, but he had 8. So I think that helped. I think Buddy Boeheim got out of his shooting slump, which he's been having that issue for the last couple of games. And Jim Boeheim also said a week ago or 2 weeks ago that they can't physically win without Buddy shooting. And so luckily he got out of that slump tonight. He led the team with 24 points. And then also I think they just locked up on defense. I think from my perspective, I think they got lazy in all their losses. I think, and then teams adjusted at the halftime and they kind of figured out, got comfortable with the zone. And I think Syracuse just got lazy on defense. I think tonight they didn't get complacent. They knew that this was a must-win game. Now, does this win matter down the stretch? I mean, not really, but I think it would matter if they lost. Because they're under 500 right now. This is the first time that Jim Boeheim in his 46 seasons as at the helm has never had a losing season. And it was starting to trend that way this year.
It was. And I guess when you have a collision course of 2 teams being lazy recently, you're about to have somebody have to get a victory and kind of pick it up. And it was Syracuse here in the second half. Our Pitt Postgame show, Syracuse wins it 77-61 as Syracuse inches closer to 500 and Pitt hopes to be there someday. Getting there. George Michalowski of Pittsburgh Sports Now, Alex Sims here, WSYR-TV. As we are talking Pitt Syracuse, of course. Now, George, Syracuse was coming off a 3-game losing streak. So as Alex is alluding to, Syracuse maybe was needing this win. This was certainly I don't want to say a must-win game, but maybe, it might have been a must-win game. You're facing a struggling team. It's a conference game. You don't want to be under 500. Your Hall of Fame head coach is kind of saying that you're being lazy, and you lost 3 in a row, and you were lazy. So, must-win game. Syracuse got the job done, but she also just talked about how Buddy Boeheim was hot. And when you have a shooter like Buddy Boeheim get hot, that certainly can carry a team. In fact, the Boeheim bunch there both had enough points that potentially could have beat Pitt in terms of their stars. Pitt with several players in double digits themselves, but Buddy Boeheim 24. When you're going across the court there for Pitt, you're looking at Burton at 14, 8 for Ugly. So not enough in terms of that big power offense for Pitt in comparison to what Syracuse was able to do. You mentioned how Syracuse zone was just a matchup Pitt couldn't handle, especially a struggling Pitt team building chemistry. Was it also maybe that Pitt also found an opponent with a shooter they couldn't handle as well? Because in past shows, we've talked about Pitt's defense maybe being that unsung force for the Panthers that could maybe help them through this season. But maybe this was a game the defense wasn't able to step up, and they also faced kind of a matchup that was doomsday for them as well.
Yeah, you know, Pitt's faced some good shooters this year. They've gotten killed by some guys in the past 2 years, actually, by some good outside shooting teams. But at the same time, the defense has been a strength for, I mean, not right. There haven't been too many strengths for Pitt, obviously. I mean, you're 6-10. It's not, you can't talk all night about strengths for this team because it's tough to find, but defense has been good in the past. I think Buddy Boeheim, he just looked like he was playing effortless basketball in the first half. Like he was hitting shots. They would send 1, 2, 3 guys to screen for him on the same possession at different times just to clear him up a look because they knew he would hit it. And that's so deadly for a team like Pitt who struggles to score the ball. Like then they have to focus all their attention. Capel always preaches defense. Then they have to focus all their attention on Buddy. And then you leave Jimmy, like the other brother, open. Then you look around the court, you got Joe Girard, Cole Swider.
There's a Boeheim fest out there, yeah.
Yeah, you look around the court, you got Girard, Swider, who can also shoot. And then Edwards had a great game down low. So it's just tough. Syracuse threw everything they had at Pitt. And that was definitely not a big win for Syracuse, just because Pitt should be a must win for everyone in the ACC this year. But I do think that'll be great for them. Good confidence builder because they were firing on all cylinders. I mean, down low, shooting the ball well. They broke down Pitt's defense and showed all the bad spots that Pitt has.
Yeah, I mean, both Boeheim brothers combined to outscore almost Pitt's starting lineup. I mean, at least 2 or 3 of them there. So that's incredible. You're looking at well over 30 with the 2 of them combined there. So both Boeheim brothers break out of kind of scoring slumps. Syracuse breaks out of a losing streak. They don't get lazy. They hold on to the lead. They build a lead. They shoot in the second half. They play better in the second half. And Pitt goes from a solid first half, shooting in that first half, to a worse second half as Pitt does lose this one as well. And once again is looking at 500 being that maybe sight in the distance. Syracuse maybe getting there. Alex Sims of WSYR-TV joining me here on the Pitt Postgame show here on PSL and Pittsburgh Sports Now. Head over to Pittsburgh Sports Now for the game recap, as well as all our coverage and video reaction here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and PSN. George Michalowski of PSN also joining me. Now, Alex, where does this Syracuse team go from here, and how did this season unravel to the way it's been here? Because when you think of Syracuse for a casual fan, they're probably just shocked and awed that Syracuse would be struggling through a season like this. You did say that Boeheim's never had a losing season in all those years, almost 50 years of coaching, never having a losing season. That's just ridiculous at any level. And yet this Syracuse team is just a team that was losing winnable games and struggling most of the season, despite having stars, despite having veteran players. Buddy Boeheim, to me, feels like he's been there a decade himself, and he's a senior, so he's been there enough time that he is a leader of this team. What's happened this year? Why is this Syracuse team maybe worse than recent years? Why are they having a struggling season after recent tournament bursts and tournament victories? And can they turn this around? You said it was a must win. They got the win. They were impressive in the victory finally. And this is after struggling recently. Is it just that this was against Pitt, or do you think they can build off of this and maybe turn this season around?
Well, before this game, I said they're most likely going to win the next 4 out of 5. So okay. I'm on the right track there. But to answer your first question, I think at the start of the season, I think this team was trying to find an identity for itself. You look at their roster, they're all new guys. Besides besides Buddy Boeheim, I mean, you have Jimmy, you got Cole, you have Jesse, who barely played last year. He really just came in towards the end of last season just because Barama Sidibe was injured. So they really needed a center to kind of, play that role. We were, so I think a lot had to do at the beginning of the season was trying to figure out this identity of this team, trying to figure out how to mesh together. Now that's no excuse, right? They played, a ton of games that shouldn't be an issue anymore. I think what really has affected them has been their defense. And I think teams are starting to figure out the zone. I think, it's a lot more common now than in years past. I think a lot of teams, have been successful in the NCAA tournament because they've learned how to play against the zone. But yeah, I think the defense has been the main issue for Syracuse and why they're losing so many games. And I actually talked to Jimmy Boeheim yesterday, and he said, and I said, is it too late to fix your defense? And how do you fix it? And he said, no, it's not too late. We still have 15, 16 games left, which seems unreal to me. It feels like the season is over right now, right?
Sure, right.
It's going on forever. So yeah, I mean, they do have time to change things around, right? And I think this is definitely a step in the right direction. I think it will be a momentum booster, is what George said, for Syracuse moving forward. They have their next 2 games at home. I think playing at home, playing, in front of Syracuse fans, I think that helps a lot as well. But again, like at first, a lot of people were thinking, oh my God, are they going to have a losing season? Is Jim Boeheim going to have his first losing season? The Hall of Fame coach going to have a losing season for the first time in his career? You really can't count Jim out, right? I mean, he always finds a way to get his team into the NCAA tournament, whether they're an 8 seed, whether they're a 2 seed, whatever seed they may be. And they always tend to make a run no matter what seed they are. So I don't think he's really concerned about, making the tournament. I think he's more concerned about his team getting back on track. And I think this obviously is the right start for them. I think they definitely, even their loss against Wake Forest on Saturday, their defense definitely played a lot better. It took a step in the right direction there. Again, all new guys this season besides Buddy. So you got to give them some break there, but I think they're on the right track.
I would also imagine that Buddy would never forgive himself if he's the leader of a team that ends up with Jim Boeheim having his first losing season. I mean, I get all the excuses that are there that are valid. It is a new cast of characters, including a fellow Boeheim brother.
And honestly, I thought too, with his slump, like he's been on the shooting slump for the past couple of games, and
happens to shooters though.
That's going to happen to shooters. But typically him, I mean, he's pretty consistent. You look at last year, he was very consistent. He was the guy. He was the clutch guy for Syracuse. But then this year you have so many other guys that can shoot. Cole Swider, he's a great outside shooter. You have, obviously Joe Girard, and then now you have Jimmy. So, I mean, I thought originally that this would be a good opportunity for Buddy to just play the game, because not all eyes were on him now, because last year was just Joe and Buddy, right? So like it was really hard to get in the groove when you're double teamed every 2 seconds. Now you have 4 of your 5 starters are shooters. So I like you said, I think shooters go through these slumps, and I think that's what happened. But he has to play well for Syracuse to win. And I agree with what Jim Boeheim said. Buddy needs to actually play for Syracuse to have a shot, and he did tonight. And what do you know? They get the dub.
Yeah. 24 points. He led the way. They got the victory. They got a must-win game, but you can build confidence in any game. So maybe he built some confidence. The team built some confidence. They got the job done. They do have an easier schedule here coming up. Maybe can build off of something. And who knows if the tournament's going to happen. I know that Jim Boeheim always somehow, like a cockroach, does find his team there, and then to make noise in the tournament. I don't know. He's going to have to do some heavy politicking, I think, this year. But you got to look at the expectations realistically too, where they are right now.
Right, and then they're inching their way to 500. I also think too, though, that the bench needs to get some more production. I think the starters have been playing for the majority of the games, and they're getting tired. So I think, Symir needs to, step up. He had 5 points tonight off the bench. But the other 2 guys are young, and, Anselm and Williams. I mean, Williams is He's a kid and he really hasn't had much time to play at the college level yet. But I think Jim needs to start really working him in and get his starter some rest.
It seems that you need depth, and yeah, I could understand Buddy being exhausted, the Syracuse maybe lineup being exhausted, being used so often. So you do need depth to have success once you get into January, February, and certainly if you would,
March.
Certainly to March if you're going to be in March, no matter what you're going to be doing in March. Alex, I'm going to let you go. I definitely appreciate the time. We'll be talking to you again there, and I. Glad to finally get you on. We almost had you on one of these football shows. So I thanks again to your colleague for jumping in there last minute. But Syracuse does get the victory, so you get to provide some positive coverage to your viewers and fans.
Yeah.
And again, have a great rest of your night.
Thank you. Bye.
Alex Sims there joining me, anchor and reporter from WSYR-TV, as I was glad to finally have her on to talk some from the other side there of Syracuse victory over Pitt. Syracuse does win it 77-61. Syracuse inches closer to 500. Syracuse looks to possibly be building some confidence to turn their season around off a losing streak. Pitt, who actually was coming off of a pretty solid stretch there, even though that included some tough losses. And then you look at Pitt's schedule there with that recent victory over Boston College, a 2-point win. And then you get this outcome here. George Michalowski still with me here from Pittsburgh Sports Now. George, on the flip side of what Alex was saying, kind of positively for Syracuse here moving on, what's the outlook for Pitt as they continue here into the ACC conference schedule? It's not necessarily going to get easier for the Panthers, unlike maybe Syracuse. You come off of this game, which is the worst game they've played in about a month now, and you lose this. Maybe you can chalk it up, and I'm sure if you're a coach, you're saying, hey, that's the Syracuse zone. You weren't ready for it. You couldn't handle it. Veterans have done worse against it. Wipe it away. We're going to throw the videotape away. Buddy got hot. You've been close against everybody else recently. You're better than this. We can move on. That's coach speak. But what does really Pitt have ahead of them? Is this just an aberration to a Pitt team that seemed like they were improving, even if the record didn't show it? Or did this expose Pitt to who they really are? And Pitt fans could expect maybe some losses here like this one, maybe unlike the recent ones, but more like this one the rest of the way.
I want to say it's exposing all of Pitt's faults. It's how they're going to fall down the rest of the season. They're not going to win any other conference games because it looks so bad. But I really think they could, shake this one off, forget about it, and get back into those Louisville and Virginia games coming up at the Pete home games and kind of keep that fight, because this team's had fight all year. Everyone's seen it. They've lost all these nail biters, and now they're coming around facing them again. It's hard to beat a team twice. Everyone always says that. And now Pitt's got the chance to take down these teams that they've seen before. And I know they had Ithiel Horn in the Louisville loss. That's going to hurt them this time around facing Louisville. They won't have Horton then. But I think they could turn it around. I still think, this win just would have been so big for Pitt because Syracuse has all the talent. They got the big name program, big name coach, obviously. Pitt just landed a recruit for the first time in a while over the weekend. And then coming off the Boston College win, Syracuse would have been a massive win. But I think the staff can do it. Just tell them to shake it off. Get them locked in on Louisville, Virginia, Clemson coming up. It's a really tough stretch.
And then Syracuse again. That's the only problem. And then you got Syracuse again. So I don't know if you figure out the zone from this game or what, but they have some tape now, at least.
It's going to be tough to turn around that quickly, pick up these big wins, come back, face Syracuse again.
Yeah.
I mean, the ACC's having a down year, but it's still going to be tough for this Pitt team they've been doing it all year, learning on the fly, as Capel's been saying, but they still just haven't been winning games. So it's I want to say it's running out of time, but I also think on one end that they've showed so much fight. They've shown so much improvement as a whole. I mean, Jamarius Burton and Mo Gee have been very bright.
I think it's fair to say if Pitt was playing like they were the first month or so of the season, they would have lost by 40 in this game.
And the previous 3 losses. I mean, they're playing significantly better, and they clearly are very close as a program. I with the recruit the other day that committed, Marlon Barnes, I was gaining more and more, or hearing more and more optimism from fans. In the comments and the messages and everything, everyone was like kind of starting to get that optimism for Capel back. And that's all it took was one recruit, one win over Boston College, and a couple close losses, because people are seeing the fight that this team has. People are seeing John Hughley become a star. Obviously not tonight, but I think there's still some hope this year for Pitt to pick up some big wins.
Yeah, and they're still waiting for that big win, unless maybe you count Boston College as that big win, but then you follow it up with this game. And it's not going to be easy for Pitt, but Pitt is light years improved to where they were earlier in the season. They've dealt with tons. This was already going to be a struggling roster, an inexperienced roster with tons of turnovers. Champagny not walking through that door. Xavier Johnson not walking through that door. And really, even though some fans don't want to hear this because now he's been there a while, and yes, he turned a three-star recruit into an NBA player. Champagny's still having success at the next level. Look at some of those NBA highlights every week or so. However, the wins aren't there for Pitt. And you mentioned it's a result-based business. Eventually, no matter what you're coaching at any level, you got to have some victories and you got to have more wins than you have losses after a period of time, or people are just going to get sick of hearing about you, and eventually you're going to be shown the door. Jeff Capel still around right now, does seem to have somewhat of a confidence from some fans, not from others. And certainly we will see what the administration there does with the athletic department. We had a commentary piece actually on PSN recently about needing to give him more time. And I do think if Pitt finishes strong, at least in these games, and makes these games close, and they have recently, with the exception of this game, that at least gets him rope for next year, because you can legit, like Alex brought up with Syracuse, no fan's going to want to hear this, but you have an entire starting five with 4 new players outside of one leader. It's legitimately going to take a while to come together. That's a valid excuse. There's many valid excuses for Jeff Capel and this Pitt team this year, even though it's still result-based business and this team has not nearly been good enough. And I think what you said at the top of the show is probably the counterpoint to what we're saying off of that, where Pitt fans who maybe are more negative are going to say, you were so close recently, and if you're saying they got lazy in a second half of a big game, in a game against a team they're even with after coming close recently, that's why I asked you. That sounds like a coaching criticism, and maybe Capel's taking that too on his post-game press conference. George, I appreciate the time for sure as well. Before you know it, we're going to be having another matchup here against Syracuse, so we'll see if Pitt figures out the zone, but it's going to be something that I don't know if you really can ever figure out in just a game or so. And Pitt does have that matchup with Louisville coming up on Saturday, 4 p.m. on Saturday. So we will see if maybe some friendly cooking is better for Pitt, and if they get back to what they've been in recent weeks, and whether this was an aberration. Potentially you could legitimately say that, because of all matchups, this was the weirdest, maybe the worst matchup from the zone, from Buddy Boeheim and all of that as well. George, I appreciate the time. Anything you want to tease here real quick that you have coming for us on Pittsburgh Sports Now while you got the airtime?
Just some more recruiting stuff. We're trying to get it heated up. So we're looking into, I'm interviewing 2023, 2022 guys. Pitt's still recruiting. You know, people have been saying, recent articles have been coming out from us, from other sites, interviewing the recruits. You know, Pitt's not going after this guy hard. Pitt's not going after this guy hard. Yeah, those are some recruits, but Capel did land Marlon Barnes the other day. That's a great sign. I just think that pickup, although he's a junior right now, won't be here for 2 more years. I think, and obviously some players have decommitted from Pitt the past few years, fans are justified to think this, but people don't think it's as secure as you think. I talked to Marlon. I talked to Marlon's coach. I think this is a really good pickup for the Panthers. And obviously all the fight they've been showing is looking good to those recruits, even though it's a down year for Pitt. And like you said, more pieces are coming up, definitely from us, talking about how young this core still is for Pitt, and how, like Mike said in the commentary the other day, he needs a little bit more time. Capel, like even a year, 1 more year, 2 more years. I mean, next year, Odicali, Hughley, Jeffress, they'll be.
I think next year is an important year. I don't know. I mean, obviously, you don't got to have any Sweet 16 expectations, but if it's a below 500 year, or a year where they only win a few conference games, or they have 6 wins into mid-January next year, when you have more experience with this team, whether they get in the postseason appearance or not, then I could say, okay, because you got to recruit and coach. You can't just recruit. You got to coach too.
At that point, they would be upperclassmen. These guys will be in their 3rd year of D1 ball, ACC ball. They've had time to prove themselves along with these transfers. So at that point, yes, but I think right now, definitely some more time. You know, the future looks decently bright for Pitt. These guys have talent, so we'll see. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, that's really the phrase on a lot of these shows, but certainly when we're talking Pitt basketball, we'll see. Right. We will see where Pitt goes from here, because they do need to show this was an aberration. This was a bad matchup. This is facing his own. This is facing some pretty solid streaky shooters who got hot at the right time against Pitt. They were close in the first half, not in the second half. Syracuse does pull away, and they get the victory. Syracuse wins it 77-61. Pitt does not follow up a relatively big victory with another one. They do not follow up recent solid play with another solid game, only one half of that solid performance. We will see now where Pitt goes from here to show whether this was an aberration or the same old Pitt team is back.